So good morning, good afternoon from wherever you guys are joining. My name is Sanjana Sudarshan. I'm the Senior Technical Advisor for Jetstream, and I work for Indiana University. Today, I will give you a brief overview of Jetstream, what it is, what it isn't, and how it can be useful to you. So Jetstream is funded by the National Science Foundation, and typically the NSF has funded high-performance computers, traditional high-performance computers, the petascale capability. So lots of cores, lots of memory, batch file system, shared systems, batch queues, etc. So some examples of these HPC systems that have been funded in the past are Blue Waters, Stampy, and Comet. All of them have been renewed for a second cycle. So the NSF then moved into researching cloud computers, how to build cloud computers. So a lot of research in the computer science area, a lot of research in networking and how to build a cloud, basically. So examples of these are the Cloud Lab and Chameleon. And again, both of these have been renewed for a second cycle. So once this experiment was successful, they then moved into funding cloud to do research. So a couple examples of these are Bridges and Jetstream. Bridges is a hybrid system of HPC and cloud, and Jetstream is 100% cloud. Jetstream has also been renewed for a second cycle. So expanding NSF XD's reach and impact. So the National Science Foundation has a program called the Extreme Digital Program. A lot of people know of this as the EXCEED program. And our goal here is to expand this program's reach and impact. So in a survey conducted about 5 years ago, they found that only 2% or less than 2% of the people that have been awarded various grants for research were able to complete an analysis or computation on XD or EXCEED systems. And they found that less than 4% of these people actually had an EXCEED portal account. And then 70% of the researchers that were surveyed said that they did not have the right resource to do research, to complete these computations, to do their data analysis and stuff. So EXCEED, NSF has the resources. Researchers have been given these grants, but the researchers that have these grants are not able to use NSF's resources to do their research. So one of the reasons why we think people don't have access to these systems is, or don't use these systems, is because they think it is difficult to use. And a very common thing that we hear when we do conferences is the HPC resources are not needed for their research. I just don't need so much. I just need, I can do my work on my laptop, is something that people tell us a lot. And then we also see people who use their laptops for 10, 20 hours of calculations, computations, and really can't use their laptop for anything else. So this is the kind of situation that we're trying to avoid, is by moving research to the cloud frees up your personal resources. And that is one of the goals of Jetstream. So what is Jetstream? Why does it exist? Jetstream is NSF's first production cloud facility, and its focus is ease of use. So not only are we trying to help people that are that know how to use computation, know how to use these resources, we're also trying to use people that are terrified of computers, that people that don't really use any of these resources in their day-to-day research, by making it easy to use. So one of the ways we do that is by having a user selectable library of pre-configured virtual machines. So basically a user just has to go in, select the virtual machine, they want to run. So you basically click on an image that your virtual machine will be based off of. And some of these terms that I'm talking about now, I will explain a little later. So if a virtual machine or image, these terms you aren't familiar with, I will explain them in a little bit. So again, use a selectable library of pre-configured virtual machines. The user just has to go click and they have their virtual machine available to them. So they don't really have to do a lot of installing of operating system. The other thing it does is it provides on-demand interactive computing. So if you've ever worked on a high-performance computer, you submit a job on the cluster, and that job sits in a queue for a while till it starts to run. And sometimes if it exceeds wall time, that job fails to run, and then you have to try running it again. But then again, you have no idea once your job starts running, you have no idea what state it is in, if it has, if it's halfway through computation or if it's almost all the way through computation. So you don't get to interact with it. Now on Jetstream, you have on-demand interactive computing. So basically it is like working on your laptop. So you submit a job on this virtual machine and you can see what's happening in real time, unlike on a HPC cluster. And it also allows for analysis of persistent services such as gateways. If you aren't familiar with gateways, a gateway in very general terms is like a web portal where you submit a query and the analysis is done on a supercomputer somewhere or on the cloud somewhere, and you get your result back. So in very, very simple terms, that's basically what a gateway is. Now, for a gateway to be available 24/7, it needs to be running on a machine somewhere 24/7. And one of the ways to allow for that to happen is provide a persistent IP address and run it on a virtual machine somewhere, such as Jetstream. So it is always available for the user to use. It also enables configurable environments. So if you are proficient, if you're knowledgeable with how clusters work, how virtual machines work, you can basically put together a few virtual machines to form a cluster on the cloud. You can also set up elastic networking where you have a job to run, and depending on the kind of job you're running, your script will figure out how many virtual machines to launch. And if your job requires 10 VMs, it will launch 10 VMs. And once the job completes, it will spin that down. So whether you're a newbie or you're an expert in cloud computing, both kinds of people can do their research on Jetstream. Reproducibility. So one of the reproducibility is very important in research. So if your lab is doing, say, research on the cloud, you're using a virtual machine, and you have a workflow that you have kind of worked through, and you have all of your scripts, all of your programs and everything on this virtual machine, you can save that as an image, and you can share that image within your lab or with your collaborators in different labs or with the community. And since you've already installed everything you need on that virtual machine, nobody can come in and say, oh, this doesn't work, and you don't have this works on my machine problem, which a lot of people face. So who uses Jetstream? If you are a researcher that requires thousands of cores, then Jetstream is not the right resource for you. We can definitely direct you to the right resource, but it won't be Jetstream. If you're a researcher needing a handful of cores, say 1 to 44 virtual machines, virtual cores, then Jetstream is perfect for you. If you are a software creator or a researcher that want to create your own virtual machines and workflows, you can use a few virtual machines to figure out how things work. And if you want to scale up, then you move to a different computing resource. Or you can stick with us if you're still using a handful of cores. science gateway creators. They use Jetstream either as a front end or as a back end. So basically, you can have a website running on Jetstream, so that will be the front end. But if you are doing computing analysis, so when you submit a job to a gateway or a web portal, what happens is it takes the job and it assesses what kind of job it is. If it is a small job, if it is a big job, and then gateways usually send it off to various supercomputing clusters. Some of them are only equipped to handle small to medium-sized jobs. Some of them can handle big jobs. So the gateway will do that kind of assessment, and if it does, if the job profile fits what Jetstream can handle, then these jobs will come to Jetstream, and then the data is processed behind the scenes. So most often the users don't know where their jobs are being processed, and honestly, it doesn't matter as long as you're getting your results. STEM educators teaching on a variety of subjects. So this is one area that we're actually pushing, especially in these times when a lot of people are not able to go to campus, and a lot of classes are being conducted virtually. Educators can get an allocation on Jetstream and teach their classes. So you can, as an educator, you can install your software or your class material on an image and save that and have your class launch that image, so everybody is on the same page. And this is also useful for workshops where everybody starts from the same base image. What Jetstream is not, it is not a traditional HPC. So like I mentioned before, there's no, on Jetstream, you have real-time interaction with your machine, with your scripts, with jobs you're running. On an HPC system, your job is sitting in queue, it's either waiting or it's running. There's no shared file system on Jetstream, so think cloudy. And this isn't Amazon Azure or Google Cloud Enterprise. It is similar, but we are a small team of people managing this cloud, and we're exclusively for research and education, and we're free. So we don't really charge for people to use the system. The charge is basically a document saying why you need to use Jetstream. So again, we exclusively support researchers and education. So if there are questions, or if you have run into problems regarding Jetstream, you could open a ticket, and 3 people respond to those tickets. So we will get back to you as soon as possible. But since we're not a huge team like Amazon, Azure, or Google, we cannot provide their kind of services all the time. All right, so HPC versus cloud. Some of this I've mentioned already. There's no reservation, no queuing. We have more interactive usage on Jetstream. You can be your own admin. So you have root access, and that means you can start any image. You can start with any image, launch a virtual machine, and install any software you want, and basically not have a sysadmin come in, install software, or give you permissions to run your own workflow on this machine. You have root access. And so if you do an RM minus RF and remove everything, then it's gone, right? You can do that. And we don't have any backup of any of your data. So if you delete everything, your data is gone forever, right? So with the powers of being your own admin, also you have some risks. So here they be dragons. So that's something just to keep in mind. And you can really have almost any software you want. Up until recently, we didn't have Windows, but I think we've had Windows, and people are actually using Windows on Jetstream as well. But we don't provide any Windows support. So if you have any Linux software, then we are more equipped to help you with Linux related issues. And if you really want Windows, then it's a more of a use at your own risk kind of situation. But then again, if you have your own software, you can bring your software to it. If you have a licensed software, you can bring that too, but you need to make sure that only the people who have access to, should have access to that license are able to access your virtual machine, and make sure that it's not available to the entire world to use. Jetstream and the way of the cloud. Clouds are more than just virtual machines. So think of this as in the old way of cloud was investing in expensive infrastructure and cheap software. So you expect the hardware to never fail. The cloudy way is to invest in commodity infrastructure, but really strong software, and you put your intelligence into the software to handle any infrastructure failure. And the best part of the cloud is to think of virtual machines as cows, not pets. Pets you take care of, feed, you name them. Cows you intend to have high turnover, and you give them numbers. So this is a quote from our cloud architect, Mike Lowe. All right, so Jetstream system architecture. We currently have two clouds. One is at Indiana University, and the other is at TAC, which is a Texas Advanced Computing Center. And we have a test cluster at the University of Arizona. The test cluster is not available for users. It is only for the development team. You notice there are fewer nodes on the test cluster. The IU and the TAC clouds are identical. Both of them have 320 nodes, and they have the same kind of storage. These systems are connected by high-speed internet too, so transfer speeds in and out of this, the cloud or between clouds is actually pretty fast. This is the platform overview. So basically, we have a similar platform at Indiana and TAC. At the bottom, right at the bottom, we have OpenStack and Ceph. Ceph is the storage backend, and OpenStack basically runs the hypervisor, which tells us which nodes are available, where VMs can be launched, and so on. So on top of this, we have Atmosphere. We have Exceed accounting. So anybody that needs to log into Jetstream needs to have an account, and this account is provided through Exceed. And authentication of these accounts is done via Globus. On top of that, we have Atmosphere services. So Atmosphere is basically what you see as the web app. So this is the web app, and this is what you see when you log into Jetstream. So this is the dashboard. And we will go into a little more of the details of what to do once you're here. So a quick overview of the dashboard. You see allocation resources. So this basically tells you all the allocations you're on. In this particular screenshot, at the time, I was in 4 different allocations, and it shows me all the allocations I'm on, how much of each allocation I've used. And since this is a screenshot, I really can't scroll down anymore, but it tells me how much I've used at Indiana University, how much of the allocation I've used at TAC, and so on. So CPU usage, memory usage, storage, and so on. On the right here, I apparently had 14 instances at the time, and some of them were active, some of them weren't. I had 1 volume in use. So images. Now, I mentioned images earlier. So what an image basically means is it is a template, which when you start it, based on that template, you can launch a virtual machine. So you launch a virtual machine based on an image. So some of the examples we have here are Ubuntu, CentOS, Ubuntu 16, CentOS 7, so on. And sorry, here it says these are featured images. Featured images are the images that the Jetstream team maintains. So if there are any updates with security patches, or if the base operating system itself has an update, then we make sure that these images are up to date. And if there are any issues with the image, of course, you can reach out to us and we can try and fix it as soon as possible. Now, apart from featured images, we have a lot of other images on Jetstream. These images are sponsored or contributed by the community. So if you know who's created a certain image, you can go use that image if you trust that person, or if you know what's in that image, you can have access to it, because a lot of these images are publicly available. So unless and until a user says, I want an image of this instance and I need it to be private, all images will be public. So the other thing to notice here is we have tags below each featured image. So if you go into your search bar and type, say, Bioconda, then you should pull up every image that has a Bioconda tag. If you type in something that says CentOS, it should pull up all the images that have CentOS in their tag. So launching an instance. So if you create, if you try to launch an instance, this is the kind of, this is the window you will see. So here you have allocation source. It asks you what provider you want it to be on. You can give it an instance name, the base image version, what project you want it to be in, and so on. And then you get to choose your instance size. It can be the smallest, it can be a tiny, or it can be an extra large image. Okay, so once an image, a virtual machine is ready, this is what you will see. So this is the image, the instance I launched. And once it's active, its status goes to green active. And that is when you're being charged. And when I say charged, every virtual machine uses up certain number of hours or units. So when we give you an allocation, you usually have, say, suppose you have 50,000 service units, then you will be charged out of those 50,000 service units when you're running a virtual machine. And I can explain that in a little bit as well. So you can decide what allocation source you want to run it on. You can see the size of your instance, tells you it's active. Your instance has an IP address, so you can directly log into your IP address if you want to. And there's an alias. So this is a unique identifier for this particular instance. So if you have any issues with this instance, you can always reach out to us with this UID and tell us that, hey, there's a problem with this instance, and we will go take a look at what the issue is. So to do that, there's a report button here. And the other things that we see on this page are image. So if you've installed software and you want to save it, if you've installed a workflow, or you just want to save the image in its current state, then you can image it. If you have finished using this virtual machine and you want to put it away, there are multiple ways to do that. You can stop your instance, you can shelve your instance, or suspend it. Now, these are 3 different states in which your instance can exist. So stop and suspend basically is it's stopping your instance, but it's so going back a little bit, I mentioned that IU and TAC clouds have 320 nodes each. So when you launch a virtual machine, each virtual machine will occupy some part of that node. If you stop or suspend your virtual machine, they will still be occupying that node. But if you shelve your virtual machine, it will be removed, it will be packaged and put away on a shelf somewhere, but it is not occupying the node. So if somebody else wants to use that node, now that node is free to be used. So if you shelve an instance, you're not charged anything. If your instance is active, you're being charged 100%. If you shelve it, you're not charged anything. If you stop your instance, you'll be charged 50% of your service units. And if you suspend an instance, you'll be charged 75%. So these are just things to keep in mind. If you don't plan on using your virtual machine for days, then it might be best to shelve it and unshelve it when you're ready to use it. Some other buttons on this page are the reboot and redeploy buttons. So there could be times when your instance is it has an IP address, but you cannot reach it, or when you're trying to deploy your instance, it is stuck in networking or deploying, but it's not going to active. So at those times, you can reboot or redeploy your instance. Again, there's the delete button in red. If you delete your instance, it's gone forever. There's no recovering it. And open web shell and open web desktop. So when you open web shell, you will see something like this. This is like a terminal that you see on your computer, but this is on a web browser. So you can use this web browser like your terminal. And web desktop. So for people that are not familiar with the terminal, or you don't want to use a terminal, you can use a web desktop to point and click and do basically the same stuff. All right, so we saw this a little bit. These are the various instance flavors for our virtual machines. We have the smallest is tiny, which has one virtual CPU, and the largest is extra large, which has 44 virtual CPUs. Now, of the 320 nodes, each node can accommodate 46 vCPUs. So if you launch only tinies, each node, you can launch 46 tiny machines. But an extra large has 44 CPUs. So basically, if you launch an extra large, you're occupying a full node. So this is something to keep in mind, because a lot of times people come in and when they try to use a virtual machine, they automatically go for the largest virtual machine because for some reason we think the larger the CPU, we will get our calculations done faster. That's often not the case. So if your calculation, if your data requires you to use a quad or a medium, I suggest you use that because you will be saving service units that way. And the other thing is by launching a medium, if you only need a medium, you're using six instead of 44. So you're only using a part of the node, so other people can come use that node. So just recognize that other people also need to use these resources. Okay, so the other thing is storage. Storage on these instances is ephemeral. So it's temporary. And you see, the tiny has the least amount of storage and extra large has the most. Now, if you delete your instance, anything that is saved on that instance is gone, right? So it is temporary storage. If you really want long-term storage, then you need to get an allocation only for storage so you can transfer all of your data onto volumes. And that way, if you delete your instance, your data is still available on your volume. You can create, destroy instances, attach them to volumes, transfer data as much as you want. And if you delete your instance, your data is still sitting on your volume. Of course, if you delete your volume, all your data is gone, and you need to remember that we don't back up any data. Okay, so newly available on Jetstream, we have GPUs, but not everybody has access to these GPUs. It's because you need to have specialized drivers to match the underlying hypervisor and for these to work. And currently, if you need access to GPUs, you need to email us so we can give you the right software to install and such. So this is also something to keep in mind if you need GPUs. Manipulating your virtual machines. The easiest way for someone to use their virtual machine is through the Atmosphere web interface. You can also get direct API access. So this is through command line. You can install OpenStack, or you can get access through Horizon, which is also a web portal. But if you have API access, that means you can have elastic compute techniques where you spin up virtual machines as and how you need them, and then you spin down when you're done. And that whole process can be automated if you have access to OpenStack command line or API access. Users can also use VNC or SSH to have access to individual instances. Okay, so who uses Jetstream? We have a variety of disciplines that use Jetstream. Our biggest user, of course, is the biological sciences. And we also have a lot of education and training happening on Jetstream. So with COVID and with a lot of people still doing online classes and, being virtual, we definitely have more education allocations that are being given out. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say about this slide. All right, so Jetstream for engineering researchers and others. We have MATLAB and Simulink installed on all of our virtual machines. So for people that have access to Jetstream, MATLAB is free to use, and it has we have two versions of MATLAB. One is the version that has everything on it. The problem with that is because it has everything on it, we need a larger virtual machine to launch these images. And so we went ahead and created a MATLAB Minimal, which has fewer tools on it. So you can launch that on a quad as well. So it's not just the usual suspects. So we have a lot of researchers that when you think about, high performance computing or supercomputers, you think about the molecular dynamics people, the modeling people, and it's not always the big, the physics and chemistries, but we have a lot of people that are using Jetstream for financial analysis or text analysis. So a while ago, when we started getting a lot of people installing R and requesting R images, because we found out later that they were doing text analysis with R. So what we did was install R on an image, on a virtual machine. We imaged it and made it available as a featured image. So people would stop installing R and they could just now use the image that we've made available to them. So you can use Jetstream as long as you have data, and if you want to do any kind of analysis, then if you're using a computer to do that, then yeah, you can use Jetstream. All right, so Jetstream for education. This is, like I mentioned before, something that we're really trying to push, because not every university has the resources for a classroom setting, or people to to gather people into a certain area so they can all attend workshops or hands-on training. So this is the thing that we're actually trying to push really hard. And we have a lot of graduate, undergraduate courses, and that's only gone up in the past, this year in 2020. And we have a lot of IU courses that are being taught on here as well. Okay, so I mentioned Galaxy before. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Galaxy, but I mentioned gateways before, and gateway basically is like a web portal. Now, Galaxy is a biomedical research platform that a lot of people use. And there are two ways to access Galaxy. You can either go through their web portal and put in your query, and Galaxy will determine what supercomputer to run this query on, and then it'll package it and give it back to you. And the other way to use it is from a pre-built image. So Galaxy is using Jetstream in both ways. So it's using Jetstream to run some smaller jobs on Jetstream, and it's also using a Jetstream. So users can come in and use a pre-built Galaxy image, which they made for us. And you can launch that image and you can do your analysis on that virtual machine, as opposed to doing it, submitting a query on the web portal. And we have some other gateways on Jetstream, and the number of gateways has been going up steadily. About a couple of years ago, we had 8 gateways, and I think right now we're up to 30 gateways running on Jetstream. Every year in the past 3 years, that's 2017, 18, and 19, we've had in-person research for undergraduates program. And this is also an NSF supplement. So it is also funded by the National Science Foundation, where undergraduate students come in and are able to use Jetstream to learn new research techniques or learn about the cloud. And it's not we don't expect the undergraduates to have a solid computer science background. You can, as long as they have the interest to learn new things, they're welcome to apply. This year, we had 6 students, and it was 100% remote experience. They still got paid. They still got paid the same stipend and all of that. But the changes this year was that we never got to meet them, number one. And number two, at the end of the 8-week program, they go to a conference called PERC, where they present their work. Now, this year, PERC was 100% remote, and they were not able to travel to that. So hopefully we will keep trying when in-person conferences are a thing again. Maybe we can send them to a different conference so they can present their work. Usage highlights. As of January 2020, we had almost 400 active Exceed projects, and these represent over 200 institutions. And the good thing, or the exciting thing for us, is 80% of the users that we have had never used another Exceed system. So in keeping in mind and expanding NSF's XD reach and impact, I think we have done a pretty good job of, reaching to people that have either not heard of Exceed or never have used an Exceed system. Since June 2016, since we started, we have allocated 270 million CPU hours to Exceed projects. We have 31 active science gateways. Currently, we have 50, this was in Jan 2020, we had 50 education teaching allocations, and we were serving over 1,000 students. And that number's only gone up. I don't have the most recent numbers for that. And then again, we have the highest user satisfaction in the most recent Exceed survey. So we must be doing something right, I hope. So what comes next? We have completed our second year of operations with extension to November 2020. We are always soliciting allocation requests, startup requests, and education allocation requests. So if any of you are interested or need access to Jetstream, then you can get in touch with us, including if you want to run a science gateway. Now, we don't help with running science gateways, but we can definitely put you in touch with the right person. And then we're also always adding new features to make Jetstream more user-friendly, more useful to the user. Atmosphere enhancements. Atmosphere is updated on a regular cycle. Tuesday every 5 weeks, and the web interface goes down, but Jetstream doesn't really go down. If you have a virtual machine running and if you have the IP address, you can still log into it. And we try to keep, up until recently, we had we were up 100% of the time because we have 2 clouds. So if one goes down for a maintenance, the other one is up. And so we kind of complete maintenance on a rotating basis. But I think we had one day where we lost connections for about an hour or so. So we can't say that we've been up 100% now. And then we're always exploring new partnerships to make Jetstream valuable to the user. So how do you access Jetstream? If you want a trial allocation, you can request an allocation today. And you just need to go to wiki.jetstream-cloud.org and request a trial allocation. Usually trial allocations are available within 4 hours. Sometimes if there's something holding up approval, it needs some manual intervention, but usually within 24 hours, you should have access to Jetstream. With the startup, with the trial allocation, you have access to 2,000 service units, and you can run a tiny machine or a small machine. A tiny has 1 CPU, small has 2 CPUs. So that is the restriction we have for trial allocations. Now, if to go around those restrictions, you can get a startup allocation. Startup allocations can be requested anytime. And they're pretty simple. They require a page of documentation saying what you do, why you need a startup allocation, and a CV. So who can request startup allocations? If you're an undergrad or a graduate student, you cannot request startup allocations. You need a PI to request for a startup allocation. But if you're a postdoc, I think you can request a startup allocation. But all it needs is a paragraph explaining the kind of work you do and why you need startup allocation and a CV. The other thing we have is educational allocations. So these can be requested anytime, right? We understand that teaching needs vary every year. And if you need an education allocation in 2 weeks to teach a class, then you can apply now and you can have that ready and going for you in, I think, 48 hours. So the other allocation that's not mentioned on here is it's right there, research allocation. So research allocation, the submission period is between 15 September to 15 October 2020. Now this is for a large allocation. So if you want millions of SUs, you would request for a research allocation. Now for this, you need to do a little more work. Again, we're not charging for any of this. The only charge is the time to write up these documents, right? And so for a research allocation, we request a project description and a scaling document. And if you've used a startup allocation, you know what kind of research you're doing, you know how many SUs you might need. And so based on that, you can request SUs for your research allocation. And of course, if you run into any trouble with research allocation or trying to write a proposal for a research allocation, we can always help with that. Where can I get help? All of our documentation is on wiki.jetstream-cloud.org. If you need access to this PowerPoint, this will go up on our website, which is jetstream-cloud.org by the end of today. So you can have access to this PowerPoint by the end of the day. We also have user guides on portal.exceed.org. If you have any questions, you can always email exceed.org at help@exceed, and they will forward that email to us. We have a couple of videos from workshops we've done a while ago for Cornell. So these are other resources that you can look at to see how to use Jetstream. And this is our NASCAR slide of partners. Indiana University, and TAC, where we have both clusters. University of Arizona is where we do the development. Johns Hopkins for Galaxy, and University of Chicago for Globus. And this is a fun slide. This is the infrared image of Jetstream. So these machines get pretty hot, and this is just the infrared image of the heat given off by this machine. And there's a happy cluster, angry cluster. So since these machines get hot, they have cooling doors, and if the cooling doors are working properly, like they're supposed to, then the doors are lit blue. Otherwise, it's lit red, trying to tell you that it's not happy. So this is just another fun slide, happy and angry clusters. Right, so if you need to get in touch with us, again, you can either email help@exceed or help@jetstream-cloud.org. This is my direct email address. So if you have any questions about that, you can get in touch with us. And this is our website, jetstream-cloud.org. So that is the end of the PowerPoint. Does anybody have any questions? All right, so if you can copy and paste this into a web browser. All right, so let me know if you don't see my screen. So I'm logging into Jetstream. I put use.jetstream-cloud.org, and I'm going to say login with Exceed. And it should bring you to this page that says login to use Jetstream web app. If you have an organizational Exceed ID, a Globus ID, you can go select your organization here. A lot of times, if you have multiple Globus IDs, Exceed will not work. So log into Globus the way you usually do. For those who don't have a Globus ID, log in with Exceed and hit continue. So here it has my username and password saved. So I'm going to go ahead with mine, but here's where you'll put in train01 and the password and sign in. Okay, so if you've signed in, it should bring you to this page here. This is a dashboard for Jetstream, and you have a few links to get started. You can launch a new instance, you can browse help resources. A lot of these will take you to a video or tutorial, or it will tell you how to get in touch with us and change some settings. So if you scroll down, you should see resources used. I mentioned this earlier. For allocation resource, I see 3 different allocations, and it tells me how much of these allocations I've used. If anybody's if anybody isn't able to access Jetstream, then please ping me in the chat or unmute yourself and we can talk about it. Okay, so provider resources. There are 2 providers, Jetstream at Indiana University and Jetstream at TAC. And this dashboard basically shows how much CPU I've used on Indiana University or on TAC, how much memory I've used, how much storage I've used, and so on. All right. And then if you scroll down a little more, you see instance history. So since yours is a training account, a lot of people have possibly used it in the past, I don't know, a few weeks. So you might see a few instances in the instance launch history. Some of you might even see some active instances. Don't worry about those. You can either delete them or just start your new instance. All right, so if I click on projects, it shows me 2 projects that I already have. I am going to go create a new project, and you can follow along. And I'm going to give it a unique project name. So I'm going to say SC Talk. Okay, and description. So this is important that you give it a unique description so you know what instances you're launching and what project these instances are going to be in. Sometimes I have this habit of creating a test project, and my description is test and my instance name is test. And sometimes when I do multiple talks like this, I have multiple test folders and I get confused about which one I'm using for which talk. So if you have multiple projects, it is best practice to have a unique project name and have a description for that project so you know what you're doing in that folder. So I'm going to go ahead and create. So it tells me when I've created this, and if you look down, it has 0, 0, 0, 0. So I really have nothing in this folder. As opposed to in my ECR folder, which I created in over a year ago, I have 2 instances, 1 volume. My atmosphere exosphere test has 2 instances, and so on. So this basically gives you an idea of how many, what resources you're using in each project. Okay, so let's go to that folder that we just created. Now I can have new instances, volumes, and so on. So I can click on new and say create a new instance, and it will bring me to this page that has a list of images, right? So I can select whatever image I want from here. Now, the important thing to keep in mind is if you want an image that the Jetstream team maintains, then you need to look for this featured tag. So any image that has a featured tag is the one that we have updated for any software updates or security patches. And these are usually the first images that are listed anyway, so it shouldn't be very hard to find. Well, I accidentally selected an image, so I'm going to cancel that. The other way to launch an image is to go here to the top where it says images. And again, it will give you a list of images. Now, it says showing 100 of 827 images. You will see fewer than 827 images. That's because 1, you guys are using a training account, and 2, I have admin privileges, so I see more images than most users. Okay, so for this demo, we can go ahead and launch whatever instance image we want. So I'm going to select that. Now that is a CentOS image. Now the thing to keep in mind when I keep saying image and instance, image is basically a template and has a software and an operating system and whatever basic software required for that operating system and everything to work on that image. When you click on that image and say launch, you are creating an instance of that image. So the image we selected now is CentOS 8. I can select launch. Now when I select launch, it'll give me instance name. Here I can change the name of that instance. Best practice is to give it a unique name, because if I launch multiple CentOS 8, then they will all have the same name. So I'm going to give this a name. So SC Talk Demo, right? base image version. So since we update these images, it's always best practice to use the latest image. If we have a ton of images in the past, then we end date some of the older images, so only the newer ones are available. We usually have 3 of the newer versions available for people to use, because some software don't always work on the newest version. But best practice is to use one of the newer versions of the image. Okay, so selected the latest. And in project, here I can assign what project to start this instance in. So I'm going to select SC Talk because that's the one I want my instance to be started in. And how many instances do you need? I can select 1, I can go up to 2, 3, and so on. I'm going to stay at 1. What allocation resource source you want to use? Now I'm on multiple allocations. I don't quite know which ones the training account is on, but I'm going to select TRA 16003. Now my provider can either be Indiana University or TAC. So when I select my provider, that means I am choosing to launch my instance at one of the 2 locations, at IU or at TAC. Instance size. Okay, so I can go with the smallest. It has 1 CPU, 2 GB memory, and 8 GB disk size storage. So for the purpose of this demo, M1 Tiny should be enough, because we're really not going to do any data transfer. We're not really going to do any calculations or anything, right? So this should be enough for this demo. Now, allocation used. So I've used up 93% of 7 million SUs for this. Now, if you look down here, we have resources instance for use. So here it says a total of 12 of 132 allotted CPUs. So I've used up 12, right? And I'm requesting 1 more, an M Tiny. So it says 1 CPU. Now, if I select an M1 XXL, a total of 55. So that is in addition, this is the total. So adding 44, I already have 11 CPUs in use. So 44 more will make it 55. So I'm going to go back to Tiny and launch my instance. So once you click launch, try not to click outside of that dialog box, because a lot of times it will just abort. So just hold on for a minute so it stops spinning and actually launches the instance. In the meantime, if you all have any questions, please ask. Okay, so that instance is now launching. I have SC Talk demo, and it launched this instance in the folder I asked it to. And now I can click on that instance, and it will take me to this page. So again, it has some of this we've already discussed when I did the talk. All right, so here we have allocation source. I can choose a different allocation source, but for now, I'm just going to leave it at this. The status is building. It is yellow. So one thing to keep in mind is when it's yellow, build or yellow active, whatever state it is in. If it is yellow, then you're not being charged SUs. You will only be charged SUs when it goes to green active. So it went from yellow build to yellow active, and you will notice that the activity is changed to networking. That means a network was created, a floating IP was created and assigned to your instance. So you can see that there's a IP address associated to this instance now. It has a neat copy button, so I can just click on that and my instance IP address is copied. Now, if I want to use a terminal to SSH into this, I can do that, provided I have an SSH key. That we're not going to go into that today. Okay, it also tells me what my instance is based on. It's based on a CentOS 8. Remember, I give it a new name here, SC-Talk Demo. I can change the name if I want to something else, right? But I'm going to keep it the same. But SC-Talk Demo doesn't really tell me anything about the instance. So the instance details here. Sorry, it looks like I lost connection for a second. So my instance details here will tell me what image it's based on. And right here at the bottom, I have the alias or the UUID, which can be used to let us know if you have any issues with this instance. And all the way at the bottom is the instance status history. So that'll tell you when you started it. So September 3rd, 2020 at 2:26 p.m. And that's Eastern time. I can refresh that and it'll tell me it went to networking at 2:27. So this is, some basic information for this instance. All right, so if you go to options, I can click delete project and this project will be deleted. There's no way of getting it back. So one thing to keep in mind always is if you have any data, always back up your data if it's on the cloud. Okay, so let's look at some other things while this is instances being created. If you go up to your username, so I click on my username. If you click on train 01 or train 29 or something, it should give you a drop-down menu. You can go to settings. Now in settings, you can change some silly things like colors or your icon color or the image you want to see. So if I click on monsters, it updates my setting. And if I go back to here, to my instance, I see a monster. So it's just, some silly things if you want to play around with. You can also change your web shell color. So for the purpose of demos, I usually have black on white because it's easier for people to see. But if you're not one of those people who likes black on white, or want black background with white print or black with green, then you can select one of the other options here. Okay, so important stuff. If you go to advanced, so click on advanced, you can add a deployment script. So a deployment script is usually run when your instance is being created or deployed. And you can definitely choose how to do that. So sometimes you want some scripts to run every time you start an instance or redeploy an instance. So if you put that script in here, this will be run when you start a new instance. All right. The most important stuff for most users is adding an SSH key. So if you've generated an SSH key, and there is documentation on that on the Jetstream wiki, on how to create an SSH key, you can upload your public key over here from your personal computer, the computer that you're using to get access to Jetstream. So you can put your key in here, and if you do that, then the thing you should be able to do is you should be able to copy your IP address, go to a terminal and say SSH to this IP address. So SSH IP address, and then it will ask you for a password for your SSH key, and you're logged in. So it's basically like working on your terminal on your Mac, but you're actually connected to a virtual machine. Now, if you don't want to do that in a minute when this goes active, it goes from active networking to active deploying. And when it finally goes to active, you should be able to click on Open Web Shell, and that will give you a terminal. Currently, it's not deployed yet, so you won't see that. All right, so I'm just going to wait for a couple more minutes. I'm going to mute myself and wait for this instance to deploy. Again, if you all have any questions, please speak up or ping me on the chat, and I can answer them for you.
In the Zoom window, if you click the Participants button, there are a number of reactions in that window, like yes, no, go slower, go faster. You can give a thumbs up or thumbs down. Perhaps for those following along, when you reach a stage where you're beginning to activate an instance, can you click on yes? And if you're finding you're getting stuck, can you click on no? So we have a question from Mary. Once my instance is running, do I use the default account name for the CentOS image or my training account? I guess, Mary, you mean for when you log into the instance?
Yeah.
How are you trying to log in, Mary?
Oh, I'm thinking ahead to using SSH from a terminal on my laptop.
Right, so you will do SSH IP address.
What
Not,
about the?
yeah, you won't be using train whatever number you have or your username,
Right.
but you will directly do SSH. And in my case, I don't know if you can still see my screen. It says SS 149.165.168.242. I will do SSH and that IP address. And if you have your keys brought into Jetstream, so if you have already pasted your SSH key here, when your instance gets deployed, these keys are injected into your virtual machine. So these keys will be in your virtual machine. So you should be able to log in that way. If you create an SSH key after you've deployed a virtual machine, then basically what you need to do is go into your machine through web shell here, and then you can copy paste your SSH key, and then you should be able to log in from terminal.
Okay, so 2 ways to get onto the machine.
Yes.
All right, well, I will try it on my shell. My system's active now.
Okay, excellent.
I've seen a few yes marks show up. So I guess people are making progress about deploying an instance.
Usually it shouldn't take a whole lot of time to deploy a Tiny, but it's because it has much less software and much less to install to kind of deploy. But in a workshop setting, when we have 10, 15, 20 people all try to launch machines at the same time, the hypervisor basically is overloaded with requests, and it has to try and decide which node it's going to start what virtual machine on, and that sometimes takes a while. So if you have launched an instance and sometimes it just goes directly to error, that's probably the reason, because the hypervisor tries to start 2 instances on the same node and only one can be launched, obviously. And in that case, just go ahead and start again if you run into an error when you're trying to create an instance. So what is the difference between Open Web Shell and Open Desktop? So an Open Web Shell, just going back to my PowerPoint for a second, the Open Web Shell shows, I hope you can see this, this is the Atmosphere web shell. So it is basically a terminal that is running on a web browser, right? So if you're using Safari or Chrome or Firefox, if you click on web shell, it will open it in a new tab, and it's a terminal in the browser. So it's pretty much like SSHing into your terminal, but you're doing it on a web browser. And the same thing here. So same principle, but you're looking at a computer's desktop instead of the terminal. So for people that are not comfortable with command line interface, typing commands into your terminal, this is more useful because you can start a browser and you can download your software and you can do everything like you're doing it on your web desktop. But it's a little slower because you are trying to emulate this on a web browser. So it's a tiny bit slower than it would, than it would be on your personal computer. But it is still giving you access to that virtual machine's desktop. I hope that clears that. Okay, so I am still deploying, and we're at 2:45 Eastern. So in the interest of time, because I know everybody's busy and you need to go to other things, I'm going to go to another project that I have, which has a couple other instances running already. So, okay, so this has this instance is active, so it's green active, and it is also an M1 Tiny. That means since it has one CPU, it is only using one service unit per hour. If I have a machine that's running, that is an M1 Medium, for example, it has 6 CPUs, so it is using 6 service units per hour. So in your allocation, if you're awarded 50,000 service units, then if you launch an M1 Medium, you're using 6 service units per hour. So if you have your medium running for 10 hours, you've used 60 service units. So that is the reason I said, try and figure out how big your machine needs to be, because suppose you run an extra large, which is 44 CPUs, and you run it for 10 hours, then you've consumed 440 service units in 10 hours, right? And you only have a limited number of SUs. And sometimes if you just forget to shelve or suspend or stop your VM and you let your 44 CPU machine run for days, you will run out of 50,000 SUs very quickly. So that's just something, to keep in mind. All right, so mine is still deploying. Going to this other instance that has already launched. Okay, so I can go here and click on Web Shell. And when I click on Web Shell, it opens a terminal on my web browser. So I can do, sorry about that. So I can do, I can run commands like I am running commands on my terminal. And it's the interface, it's pretty fast, it's pretty quick. So I can also do the same thing with web desktop. Now, when I log into web desktop, my web shell automatically logs out. So that is something to keep in mind. And I can, point and click here, or I can open a terminal in my web desktop. And do the same kind of commands here. So again, the point of this is to make it easy for all kinds of users to use it. If you are a new learner, then you can definitely use a web shell and web desktop. Otherwise, SSH is actually more convenient if you know how to use it, if you're comfortable with it. Okay, what else? All right, so we've already talked about suspend, shelve, and stop. Shelve will not cost you anything. So if you are using your instance and if you decide that you don't need to use it for the next few days, then you might as well just shelve it. Stopping and suspend is useful when you know you're going to come back to it in a few hours, or say even the next day. The reason I don't recommend shelving an instance all the time. If you're gone for a couple hours and you shelve it, shelving basically means it's going to stop all processes and preserve the state of your virtual machine and put away everything. And so when you come back and unshelve your instance, it needs to start everything from scratch. So it has to build a network, assign an IP address. And if you're only gone for a few hours, it's okay to stop or suspend it, because creating a new network, assigning a new IP, and all of that takes more time. So unshelving an instance typically takes a little more time than stopping starting or unsuspending an instance. Again, that's left to how you want to manage your instance. So there is that. Okay, a couple other things. Image. So let's say you've opened your virtual machine, you've downloaded some software, you've installed, you've set up your environment variables, you have your paths all in your bash file and everything, and you want to save that, right? It's always best to save it as an image or back up your data in case you lose it for whatever reason. So one way to save it is to image it. Now, imaging will save everything on your instance in the image. Some files are deleted if it's in certain folders, because those are erased while creating a new image. So you might want to look at our imaging documentation to see where to not put files. But if I'm creating a new image, I'm going to say this is a new image. I will give it a name. Again, give it something meaningful, something that tells you what's in that image, right? And give it a description. Tell us what's on that image, what you've done. And this is more for you than for us. This is more for the community, because if you create an image and you come back to it and you don't know what's in it, then you're going to start over. Also, if you're going to make this a community project, if you want it to be available to people, then it might be best for them to also know what's on your image. So if they want to use it, they can. And the last thing over here on this page is image tags. You want to give it some images. So if you have Docker on this image, give it the tag Docker. If you have genomics, give it the genomics tab. So I added genomics. Now this image doesn't have genomics, so I'm not going to add anything to it. All right, so next, give it a version name. So if this is a new image, this will be the first version of this instance. So we can leave it at 1.0. And what have you changed? So it's always best to add a change log to say what you've added to your instance, right? Okay, so this is just a test. I am not going to submit it, and I encourage you to not submit this, because do not submit any image requests, because we will only go in and delete them at the end of the session. So you can click next to see what we have. All right, so the other thing you can do is have a public or private image. Now, if you have licensed software, I recommend your image be private. Or if you have data that you don't want to share with the whole world, you can keep it private, which means only you will have access to it. Now, if you want other users, say your mentor or your collaborator or your students, to have access to this image, then you can give access to specific users, and in which case it'll ask you for a username, and then you can add them to that image. So they will have access to that image as well. Okay, at this point you can hit submit, but please don't submit a request, because I will only have to go delete it later. So, all right. So for people, if and when you create an image, if you submit an imaging request, it will come to us here, and then we can go ahead and process that request. One thing to remember is, oh, my instance is finally active now. One thing to remember is not to image S1 images. Those are storage intensive, and S1 images almost always just break. So if you're imaging, don't use S1s, just stick to the tiny, small, quad, medium, or large images. Okay. All right, so the last thing we will look at is attaching volumes. So I'll go back to my project. I have an instance that is active. I want to attach a volume to it. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a volume. So now I always like to give my volumes the same name as the instance I am going to attach it to. So if I have a SC Talk demo volume, I know that it belongs with the SC Talk demo instance. And you can go from 10 to, I think the default on a lot of the training accounts is 100 gigs. So I'm just going to create a 10 GB volume. So here you can see that I've already used 1500 of my 2001 GBs that are allotted. Now, if I say add 100, you can see that this bar increases just a little bit. If I say, give me a 1 terabyte volume, it says I've exceeded my storage quota and it cannot give me so much volume space. So I'm going to request a 10 GB. And I'm going to create that volume. All right, so notice my provider is Indiana University. The one thing you need to remember when creating volumes is your instance and volumes should be on the same provider. So if you want to attach a volume to an instance, you can't have the instance on Indiana University and the volume on TAC. They have to be on the same provider. So let's click on volume. And on the right-hand side here, you have a report, attach, and delete action buttons. So I'm going to attach it. The only other instance here is the SC Talk demo. So I'm going to attach that volume to that instance. And this should take a moment. If you go back to your project main page, you will see I have an active instance, and it says I'm in the process of attaching a volume to my instance.
In the meantime, we have a question from Mary in the chat, who can get onto the system using the web shell, but not from the Mac terminal app, getting a connect to host IP address connection refused. Do you have any tips on what might be the issue here?
A lot of times it's probably just the SSH key. If Mary, have you imported your SSH key into Jetstream?
Yeah, I have, and it shows up in my in web shell. I can see that it's in the authorized key files for my train 06 account.
Okay.
Is it a different key to your regular macOS terminal key? You might need to explicitly use it with SSH-I and the path to the key.
You know, I've tried different variations. I'm wondering if anybody else is able to do that, and if they can, then I'll debug it with you guys later on. I use this key, this public key a lot, so I also downloaded the public key for the training account and tried to pass that as an identity file. So I've tried different combinations. So
okay.
Don't know if it's me or something else.
I don't know if anybody else has tried this, but if anybody else has similar issues, please let us know, and we can try and go over it after this demo if we still have the time.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. All right, cool. Because I'm looking at the time and we have like 3 minutes left, and I just want to show one more thing. Okay, so all right, so I have my volume that is now attached to my SC demo. Now, if I go to SC talk demo, this is my instance. Let me click on open web shell. All right, so if you see the two folders up, what I see is volume B. So volume B is the mount point for a volume. It doesn't matter what name you give your volume. Like, for example, here, my volume is called SC Talk Demo. And you can only identify it as SC Talk Demo on the Atmosphere interface. OpenStack, which is running everything else behind it, doesn't have that information. So as far as OpenStack is concerned, your volume is volume B. So I can CD into volume B, and it really has nothing in there right now, but that is my volume. Now let's see what happens if I attach another volume. Another 10 GB volume. I'm going to create it. This is also on Indiana University, and it created it in like 5 seconds. It's unattached. Okay, I'm going to go attach it to my volume. I'm sorry, my instance. Mary, in the meantime, can you try SSH train number at IP address?
I get connection refused.
For that as well?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so my second volume is now attached. I have 2 volumes attached to this instance. So when I did an LS, I saw volume B. Now let's see what happens. Let me get out of volume B and do another LS. And now I see volume C. So these are the 2 volumes I have attached. So anything I put in these volumes will go into volume B and volume C. And of course, if you want to ever delete your instance, you have to detach your volumes and delete your instance. And that way you can store all of your data on your volumes. Okay, if you all have any questions, I welcome them at this point. But as far as the hands-on is concerned, I think I've covered almost everything. So do you guys have any questions?
Well, the other way around. So you've got the second one you've got here for M. Thomas at Quantum. So that's the public key of something that you have the private key of on your laptop, correct?
Correct.
So let's try that instead. SSH-V-I and the key that associates with this the private key of M. Thomas at Quantum.
So that's going to be, just to make sure, you sound like you've got a lot of experience with this, so that's great. That is going to be this guy right here, right?
That's your default one, is it? Okay, so it'll use that by default. So then you should be able to do, yeah, just SSH.
I shouldn't even really need to do it, but I could be explicit, right?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be explicit. ID RSA, not the pub though, the private.
And now do I use
Can you
train?
hit backspace 4 times?
Can you just delete the pub, .pub?
Yep,
There.
that's it, space. And then, yeah, then train 06 at, etc., etc. Let's try that.
There you go.
Okay, you know where I was coming from on that is on Amazon, you get a PEM file, and that's what you include for the identity. And if you get a PEM
Yeah.
file, you can split it to the ID RSA public private and use it differently. And I was thinking PEM file, so I was grabbing the ID public key.